Well, good afternoon, all. I'm sure you're very impatient and waiting for our wisdom to come to you, and your day has been dreary up to this point. Stop feeling weary, stop feeling dreary. We have come. Habemus Pat McArt.
Um,
Donegal. Habemus Pat. Well,
well, Bama's Pat,
ha-
big day, wasn't it? What do you
oh,
make of
yeah.
it?
Oh, well, somebody said, I heard someone talking about it, and they said it was almost like, I don't think they said an assault on your senses, but it was an overpowering tide on the TV on your senses. The band in the blue uniforms, and then the
Yeah,
Swiss guards, and then the people, so excited they were jumping up and down.
yeah, yeah.
And then the setting of St. Peter's Square, and then the sort of tension, who would it be, who would it be? And out your man comes. Um, I thought, yeah, very well done.
Yeah.
But I guess with that kind of tradition, it's a bit like the royal family I kept thinking of. When you have a
Yeah.
coronation, they really pull out all the stops. Or do you think that's an unfair comparison?
No, I'd say it's totally accurate comparison. In fact, my dear Mrs. said last night we were watching it, and she says, only the Catholic Church does pomp and ceremony better than the royals. Jude, that the way it was all done, the cardinals, and the way the sort of what would you say the coordination and the synchronization of it all was superbly done. And
Uh-huh.
Jude, I was driving home there around lunchtime, and I was listening to RT, and they played, that choir, and it was the first mass the Pope celebrated Leo the 14th this morning. I think
Yeah.
it was in the Sistine Chapel. I'm not sure now, but the music was absolutely the voices of the guys in the choir was absolutely brilliant. I thought nowhere in the world would you get that. So I was sitting watching it yesterday evening. In fact, I'd been out and I wasn't aware of it. My dear Mrs. Again, she said, by the way, she says, I think there's someone come up on my social media page saying there's white smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel or where that room is.
Yeah.
So then I turned on the TV and switched between BBC and RT. Anyway, bottom line of it all was suddenly then Habemus Papam.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a pope.
Well, everybody was glad, I think, or a lot of people were glad to see the back of the Latin Mass. But somehow, certainly in phrases like that, it has a certain dignity and a certain
Oh
historical
yeah,
quality to it,
certain richness, a certain
Ah,
culture. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I thought it was.
but hey,
Yeah.
but anyway, Richard, let's move on. You're our religious expert, seeing half of your families in the religious life or were in the religious life. Here's the thing: uh, this guy, I think he didn't post at all this year, but I think he posted something like on social media 4 times last year. He disputed JD Vance about a priority or the hierarchy of who we should love. He didn't agree with Trump's immigration stance. He seems basically cut from the same cloth as Francis. And one of the Looney Tunes, and there's Ron pejorative about how I'm setting this question up. One of the Looney Tunes in Trump's circle said he's a Marxist, the same as Francis. So, how do you see him and the world that Trump's trying to shape, the new
Well,
pope?
I would say that the fact that was born and lived in Chicago, I would say
Yeah,
that that was a factor that weighed, not exclusively the most important factor, but an important factor, I would say, to act as a counterweight to Trump. And this time there's the idea is and he's relatively young, so somebody to give stability to the Catholic Church and also to have,
mm,
make it maybe harder for Trump to say the daft things he's saying because in a way he could speak not only as the Pope but also as an American. Uh, and
yeah,
now he may abandon his American citizenship like Mark, what's his name?
Carney,
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 yeah, yeah. Actually, I was thinking of Mark Carney as I watched him come out, and I was thinking he was a
right?
sort of a cross. Well, a sort of a cross between Mark Carney when I first saw him and Pope Pius XII.
Mm,
His robes were very old, sort of fashioned. That thing around his
yeah,
neck, the stole, I think. He looked a bit like, and from the distance, like Pius XII. That tall, serene, assured, confident figure, very different from Francis. So I thought there was
Yeah,
that. And like Mark Carney, he's the kind of guy you wouldn't like to start getting into an argument with because he'd be too bloody smart for you.
yeah,
And very self-assured without being bombastic or pushy,
yeah.
just a totally
Mm,
at home in his own skin and at home in his own brain. But I was thinking also,
yeah.
though, that one of the things I think I said about Mark Carney was he was a little bit is a little bit bureaucratic even.
Yeah,
He's not a colourful figure, whereas Francis
no,
would be colourful and say the colourful thing. I don't think this man will do that. Um,
no. Well, isn't he a bit of a polyglot? He can speak, I think, it's six or seven
oh,
languages.
something like that,
He
yeah.
also, at university, studied, I think, maths and physics.
Mm,
So he's a bit of a polymath as well as being a polyglot. He seems to be able to do a lot of things. And he apparently travels on a Peruvian passport, or has
mm,
done.
mhm,
He
mhm,
he, uh, he spent time as a missionary or a bishop down there, so on. So he'll understand South America, and of course he'll understand the Anglophone world too, is in the sense that he's American and
mm.
all the rest. I read somewhere in social media last night, Jude, Trump has now become the second most influential American, not the first. So there's got what is it, Jude? There's 1.2 billion
Yeah.
Catholics, and you know. Leo the 14th is coming in, right. There's all this thing about child abuse. There's about things about the role of women in the church. There's financial things. Apparently, the Vatican is losing 82 million a year.
Mm.
There's things like pension funds that needs to be sorted out. That's just and he's in tray right from day one. It's a hell of a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, it certainly is. And no wonder they said, that he was just a little bit emotional taking on this job. Yeah, that's all true. I thought there was an emphasis on the degree to which he was similar to Francis, and he was close to Francis, I understand. And he
Mm,
certainly has that option for the poor. He lived,
mm,
I don't know how he lived, maybe, but he certainly knew about poverty in Peru. I think was it Lima or somewhere else in Peru he was
yeah,
living.
I think
So
so.
they're
Yeah,
very close. Taking the name Leo, of course, too, is an echo of Leo the 13th, who was a big man into workers, Catholic workers, and
the social
uh,
contract stuff.
unions and stuff. I thought that was very good. So in that respect, he resembles them. Doesn't resemble him. If you look back, you'll see that he doesn't resemble him the whole way. For
Mm,
example, his views, his uh, theological views, would be rather more traditional. Like he's not in favor
yeah.
of gay marriage. He's not too in favor of LGBT. Now, how he'll respond to it. I mean, Francis wasn't, I don't think, in favor of them either, but he was prepared to accept them and embrace them.
Well, he said divorced people could get Holy Communion.
Ah,
What
yeah,
he was in, blessings
yeah.
for people. He sort of
Same-sex
basically said
unions,
people
yeah,
of
yeah,
gay, the LGBT were welcome in the church, etc.,
yeah,
etc.,
yeah,
etc.
yeah.
And remember, you corrected me. Didn't he say, "Who am I to judge?"
That's
I
right.
know,
That's
and
right. Yeah. Now, I don't think I'll get that from Leo. I get the impression that he'll be a little bit more orthodox. At the same time, I don't think he can go back. I was just thinking about this in terms of his accommodation. Even, will he inhabit the same modest apartment? Will he be driven around the same modest car as Francis? Now, you might say, well, no, this is a different pope, but it will not have a good look if he pulls back from
yeah,
that and goes back into the palatial thing and then be driven around in a big limo. Mind
yeah,
you, lots of precedents for it. We do it all the time in Ireland. We've always done it, and I
yeah,
have always objected to it. So, except we are able to cast the first stone ourselves. Um,
yeah,
I just think, people are keen to stress the link, and he talked about bridges, and he's right too. To talk about bridges, you do want to maintain the kind of papacy that Francis gave the world. I mean, when looking back on it, he really was a saintly man. He was a man,
yeah, absolutely.
really following in Christ's footsteps. This man
Yeah,
is well, presumably he's a holy man, but he's also a man who is, I gather, equipped to run the church. You know,
Yeah,
he was a pointer of bishops all over the world for quite a while. So he knows the score, and they say that that's part of the reason that he's been chosen, um,
yeah.
as well as the fact that he stuck it to JD Vance. And he didn't comment on. I'm still thinking about that picture, that AI picture that Trump made of himself as Pope.
Yeah.
What do you think's happening in his head when he does that?
Jude, I think the man is a total narcissist, megalomaniac. And I think he said, what was the big deal? Can nobody take a joke? But Jude, I think he sees himself as, as some sort of absolute legend in his own mind. Like he's already said that he's looking to have his face added to Mount Rushmore as one of the great presidents. And apparently he's floated that quite seriously to various people. The man, when you find out that and have you watched one of the cabinet meetings where he sat and invited all these cronies on, to sort of laud him? It was absolutely vomit-inducing, sycophancy. What you've done so brilliant. And your woman, the what do you call it, the Homeland Security woman, I think her name, Nome or something, her name. Mr. President, you've done more in your first 100 days than any other president in history. Yeah, more damage, and all the rest. And you go, just it's you sort of go the obsequious sycophancy. It was unbelievable. It was like 14th century courtiers coming into the king and kneeling and kissing his feet.
That's right.
Ridiculous.
That's right. It's more than ridiculous. It's sort of sinister. I've just come
Yeah.
from, and that's the reason I was late to traffic. I've just come from a shared reading session where we look at a short story in the Belfast Central Library. And the short
Mm.
story today was written in 2021, I think. And it's a grandfather replying in longhand to his grandson who sent him an email. And the email is where he's worried about his girlfriend, and she has sort of more or less vanished. And he
Yeah.
thinks that she's been lifted by the authorities. And
Yeah.
the grandfather talks about how him and his wife, grandmother, they spent their time doing little puzzles and things, and having a little glass of wine, and having the joys of the end of their years, and worrying about the grandson and advising him, to not get too indignant. And effectively, it shows the whole thing of how a country, he's talking about Trump, he doesn't mention him, but it's all about Trump, saying how a country slides into acceptance of these things because people don't want to stand up and get their heads shot off.
No.
So you keep quiet and they gradually, and there's a great scene in it where he talks about this guy, I think was a university prof that's writing a fictional character, and how he's stopped by a cop, young cop, who says, "Let me see your driving license," and he's not very far from his own home, and he said he was a really nice young guy, a little baby face, but big arms, and he showed it to him and so on. He's saying. Yeah, what do you think of the present situation? And your man made some evasive reply, and he said, "Yeah, do you spend much time at your computer?" And he says, "Well, I do sometimes." Yeah. Oh well. And then the last thing he says, "Well, have a good day and keep away from that computer." You know,
Yeah.
it's that
Uh,
insidious sort of. And the problem the grandfather poses is, do you stand up? And he urges essentially the grandson, don't stand up because you'll get hurt. Do you
yeah.
not stand up, or do you try to stand up and say, this is wrong? What's happening in our country is wrong. They're
Yeah.
really,
But there's a track record now. Academics in America are scared shitless to speak out.
yep.
Columbia University, the dean of the journalism school, was reported there several months ago. A young trainee reporter or a student asked him, you know, what about standing up? And he says, "Son, don't." You know, dude. See when you muzzle the press, and like look at what Trump has done. He has actually stopped certain media outlets from coming in. He has barred others. He has done various things. A lot of his interviews, Jude, are basically powder puff stuff, set pieces. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's without question one of the most obnoxious Looney Tune politicians anywhere in the world. Her husband, he works for some far right thing. He is the guy who asked Zelensky, "Why don't you wear a suit?" Like that guy shouldn't have been on a press. He shouldn't have been there at all. And these are all teed up shots for Trump and so on. Like they've brought in these guys to sort of mix up the press room to to basically give Trump an easy run. Trump does not do it. Can you imagine him, Brian Walden or Jeremy, what do you call him,
Maxwell.
Paxman, and doing a real interview? The I think a CNN or somebody, no, ABC's, was it Brian Moran or Brian Doran? I can't remember. Interviewed Trump, and he was the first person to ask him straightforward question. One of the things the guy that the American citizen or the by the illegally exported or deported,
Yes.
he he, uh, he said about this MB13 on his hand, and the reporter said. That was actually photoshopped to justify, what happened. He said, Trump says, "Oh, you're not being very nice to me, are you?" Now, Jude, what sort of a president sort of says when somebody points you out in a lie, tells you, "Oh, you're not being nice to me"?
Well, I think we're agreed, Pat, that I mean he is just a shit of the first order, totally unscrupulous, power hungry, and crushes anybody who comes near him that he feels is threatening him in any way. But I take comfort because I see online, podcasts. There's a guy called Ezra Klein who writes the New York Times, and the New York Times
Mm.
is still opposed to Trump, and it's quite a powerful
Yeah,
organization. Um,
yeah,
I don't know if you look on YouTube, you'll find clips of Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is
yeah,
brilliant. He doesn't pull back. He'll talk about Gaza. He's a
yeah,
Jew himself, and he'll talk about
yeah.
Gaza, and he'll say what a disgrace it is. So I think there are quite a number of strong, fearless voices. But we were talking about this, we were saying, would you have the courage, supposing that was happening in Ireland, Pat, or the same thing was happening, what would you do? Would you organize a protest march? Um,
It's a very, you'd love to be able to say yes, but I'm not sure. Like a lot of people in America, if you've got a wife and a family and
exactly.
education things and a mortgage to pay, it's all very well to sort of say, "Oh, I would do this and I would do that," but so many have lost. Dude, the number of cutbacks that where people like the Federal Aviation Authorities let go a massive number of people. The American Civil Service have let go a whole lot of people. They have attacked the universities. And so on. Even I know the chancellors or provosts, whatever the hell they call them in America, presidents, I think they call them, have lost jobs. Dude, and the problem is that Trump is in the White House, and that means a Republican, and they control Congress and they hold a House of Representatives, and the Republicans in Congress are absolutely, and there's no other way of it, scared shitless of Trump. They will not cross him. They are doormats. They are total lack of any sort of spine to stop him.
Hmm.
Now, there's one uh, earlier this week. There was a guy who was going to be appointed some sort of attorney general, so I think in Washington, and one Republican. It was tied at 12-12, and one Republican refused to vote for Trump's nominee. By the way, the guy Trump was trying to put forward was the guy who attacked and prosecuted some of the people who prosecuted those involved in the October or the January 6th riot.
Hmm.
He's gone after some FBI agents, etc., etc. It's getting so ridiculous. Robert F. Kennedy has appointed a woman to head up as a surgeon general. She's not even a qualified doctor. She doesn't have a license, and she didn't finish her residency. So uh, I think it's the Holocaust Museum. Trump has appointed a woman from Housewives, Real Housewives of Hills or something. She's a very attractive looking woman, but it's and so and then everywhere you look, it's like the editor of the News of the World has taken over the running of the American political system. Like it's Pete, what do you call it, Pete Hecklesmith, or whatever the hell the defense secretary. He was a Fox News presenter. What do you call her, Navarro? She used to be another Fox. She's been appointed, I think, Washington Attorney General. It's a joke, Jude. Every unqualified conspiracy looney tune is getting an appointment.
Okay, well, here's one for you, Pat. Now, I tend to agree with you, but I have an uncomfortable feeling. When Martin McGuinness became Minister for Education, there was a gasp from the DUP. I remember that so well when his name was announced. And I remember the secretary in Jordanstown, our secretary, she was a stout loyalist, I think, or not a stout loyalist, she was just simply a strong
Yeah.
unionist. And she said, well, that's ridiculous. I have more qualifications for an education than he has. And that's true. Martin McGuinness has been the first one to say that he hadn't any. But I don't. I didn't see that actually as a bar to him being a good minister for education. In fact, he did one really good thing when it wasn't followed through on, and that was he abolished 11 plus. So, isn't it possible that these people? And I'm not saying they're all um, um, good people or effective people, but isn't it possible that they would be able to do these jobs quite effectively, even though their background is very different?
No, Jude. No matter what way you look at it, I remember a British Army colonel telling me one time that he regarded Martin McGuinness as a bit of a genius. And I asked him why. He says he was able to keep the British Army on the streets for 25 years as head of the IRA, that he ran the organisation, and Martin did run the organisation, let me assure you. And he said, no matter what anybody thinks of it, he says the IRA was brilliantly led. They were able to do things and came up with strategies and did all this sort of thing. Secondly, he negotiated with the British government. He was the main guy who at the talks with Tony Blair and all those guys and so on. And he had a track record, a proven track record of ability. And by the way, a Protestant guy I know, a unionist, told me, he said the two best ministers in the first assembly were both from sorry, the best and the worst ministers in the first was or both Sinn Féin. I'll not say who was the worst, but he said Martin McGuinness. And by the way, he did definitely say he's Martin McGuinness was easily the best minister of that whole around that cabinet table. So
Well,
Jude, but here's this doctor, no qualifications whatsoever. Hexeth is an alcoholic who presented a program. Apparently, it's total chaos on the U.S. Defense Department. He doesn't know whether to shit, share, or shave, and that's not been crude. Apparently, he is beyond a joke. There's all sorts of the woman who well, no, I keep going, but the point is, he's appointing people who not because of their ability, but because they're loyal to him.
well, I agree with what you're saying, Pat. But I mean, I still we could come back on that thing about Martin McGuinness being the Minister for Education. There were quite a few ex-militant Republicans, IRA people,
Yeah.
who were in the government in Stormont, uh, and I don't think anybody saw them as being necessarily qualified in the sense of having political experience, but they were.
But these people are deeply, deeply unqualified. That's the problem.
Mm, mm. Well, I don't know.
They're
I'm
not
worried.
totally convinced, I see.
Well, you know, I'm convinced, but I think there's a bigger question after that, Pat, and that is what's going to be done
What's
about it.
that?
What's the point in us sitting here lamenting this kind of thing? And we've done it again and again. Except something can be done about it, or at least we could advise concrete steps that people could take. I think there's a
No,
really
you can't. No, that's the reality. The reality is that Trump is all the power.
well, listen, Pat, if he's doing things and they sound very much to me like he's breaking the law, picking up people
Yeah,
and send them down to wherever it is,
El
um,
Salvador. Yeah,
or now he's talking about sending them to Libya. Um,
yeah.
and these are people who are, haven't been given a trial, no reason for it really, but there's just, it's happening. He's breaking the law. I mean, aren't there laws in the United States? Why aren't the forces of law and order, the Justice Department or whatever, saying this is wrong? You have arrest these people. You can't do that. Arrest the people that
Yeah.
are deporting them illegally.
So the Supreme Court voted 9-0 against him, and they basically bring back. I can't remember the name of the guy. Bring him back. And then he said, sure, he's in El Salvador. There's nothing I can do. Now, you telling me, Jude, seriously, that if the president of America rang up the president of El Salvador and says, send your man back, that he
Hmm.
wouldn't do it?
Of
El
course he would.
Salvador, who's picking up, he would have done it in the morning.
Of
But
course.
anyway, I think the courts, the John Roberts, who I think is the Chief Justice on the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
has come out there finally and saying attacks on the judiciary are unacceptable and all the rest of it. But like apparently he might be a secret trumper as well. So who knows?
Well, you see, that's why we're saying we're powerless. That this guy, I thought the big thing about the American system, particularly, was checks and balances. That
That's gone,
the
Jude.
president
Uh,
couldn't do this because, or could do this, or Congress could do this, but the president would counterbalance in all stages to check against tyranny. Now, what has happened? Are we saying Trump has broken the law, or his cabinet members have broken the law? It does sound to me like they
they
are.
have. Jude, there's no
Well,
doubt
well
about it. They
then,
have.
what's the
But,
procedure? Surely an arrest should be made if that's the case, or they should
yeah,
be tried in
but
court.
but hold on. He's put in charge and a guy of the FBI, who, I think he's of Pakistani or Indian origin, and he was supposed to have his what would you say, report for budget and it's statutory. He was supposed to have it in last week, and he hasn't had it in. And he was asked in Congress or in the Congress the last day, when will he have it? I said basically I don't know the timeline. Now, according to the Constitution, he was supposed to have it in, I think, someday last month or last week, and he hasn't it done. And that Tally Bennett or something, I can't remember his name. No, that's a really good. But he just sat there and said, oh, you know, and he was asked by one of one of on the committee, like, well, what are you going to do about it? And he says, well, I don't know the timeline now, so I can't answer that question. And talk about arrogance. Like, I think Trump's people think the rules don't apply. Like J.D. Vance made some sort of comment about nuclear power the other day, which is totally stupid. And they seem to be ignorant. Vance, by the way, said that courts should not be used to impair the power of the president, particularly in things like immigration. You know.
Well, I think, we either accept that there are laws that could apply, or we throw up our hands at it and there's nothing we can do. I think much of what we're saying we would have said about Gaza as well. That, the
Mhm.
International Court of Justice has said that this is an effort towards genocide. And yet, war criminals, Netanyahu, etc. But, I mean, there's no question of them trying to enforce them. You do. Tell me this, Pat. I know this is depressing. Um, do you think we're living in a time when terrible things are going to happen?
Jude, what do you call? I was chatting to a friend of mine today, and he says, he says we're living in an awful sort of time. He says everything that we thought we were building towards, he says, is seeming to falling apart. Jude, look, today in Russia, there's a VE Day. China, Xi Jinping, or what the hell you call him, I can never remember how you Xi Jinping is in Russia. There's a massive realignment. People are starting to fall away from America. The whole idea of democracy. Look at the words. We have Trump. An absolute idiot. No matter what way you want to, he has attacked allies. He wants to destroy basically the whole world order. Before he's finished, he could tank the world economy. He's a nasty, vicious man. You have Orban in Hungary. You have Erdogan in Turkey. You have the far right on the rise in Germany, and like the Labour Party in Britain, which was supposed to be the work. Jude, I don't know if saw a Question Time last night, but there's a doctor, a young woman, she was on, and she's very good. She said basically the Labour Party has moved away totally from its grassroots, and the Labour Party now, Jude, has become a total right wing organisation. There's the old, no, the things about a better world, a fair world,
Mm,
equality,
mm, mm.
civil rights, no other things that me and you would have brought
Yeah.
up in the 1960s. By the way, where's the Bob Dylans and the Joe and Baez and all those people protesting for a better world? It's gone.
Well, a lot of those would have been protests that took place on campuses. And Trump has
Yeah.
managed to do two things. One, to make any protest against Israel into an anti Semitic protest.
By the way, you can get 20 years in jail now on a bill that's coming up on Monday
God,
if you
I,
boycott Israel.
I, jeez. Words beginning to fail me, Pat. I wonder if we're just blowing, pissing against the wind here. Um, there
Yeah,
are times you really would get depressed, but I still would have hoped that there are sufficient number of intelligent people and people of principle in the States who won't stand by and take this. And the other thing is this, Pat. If the laws he's passing or the economic policies he's following, Trump, if they're as bad as we're given to understand, if they're aiming to reward millionaires and screw the workers, the
yeah.
penny is going to drop eventually. The penny has to drop if the worker finds that food's dear, that they're out of a job, any number of things happen. If that happens, there's got to be a kickback against what's going on. I mean,
Aye. But you look at the American political system is so massively corrupt. Right. If you're a Republican, somebody like Elon Musk, if you're running on a state, he puts in maybe 100 million and behind you, and then suddenly, and there's all sorts of research done on the opponent. If he had an affair, the smear job is done, everything they can.
hmm.
Basically, and all the advertisements and the local TV stations and newspapers and social media, it's all paid for by this guy. And suddenly, Jude Collins is the greatest politician in history, and Pat McCarthy's opponent is the biggest loser of all time. And then you switch it to the Democrats. The Democrats, you try as a Democrat, try and say anything about what's going on in Israel, saying about what's happening in Gaza. APAC will come in and say we're going to put up somebody primary, and they will pour money in right, left, and centre. Dude, that should be totally illegal for funding and the way it's. America has now been ruled by the super rich. You need to be a billionaire now to really run.
But that has been the case for the last 30, 40 years. I mean,
Oh, dude, it was what do
JFK
you
couldn't
call
have
it?
run except his dad had loads of
That
money.
Aye, but hold on. There was a judge, I can't remember his name, where he said, no, these packed. In other words, industrials could get together and give big funding. Up until that, it had sort of been illegal.
Hmm. Uh, well, I still would like to think, that things would get to a point where people would say enough's enough, whether it's just the ordinary worker. You see, one of the things that Trump has done is he's encouraged people to say experts don't know their arse from their elbow. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
you're criticizing me because I took a guy from Fox News to be my new minister for whatever. Sure, look at the last minister that Biden had. Sure, he was bloody useless. That,
Aye.
I, it's really
But
sort of. I think maybe I dare I say this. It's stupid or gullible people who are believing because they always sort of resent it. And there is a natural tendency to resent these guys are getting fat salaries and, who knows what the hell do they
yeah,
know? So I think he's feeding that. And people will allow things to happen in the hope that, well, the last lot are so useless. Universities are so useless. Maybe it's well if they just flatten the whole bloody lot of them and put in somebody totally different and let's see what happens.
dude, that's exactly what he's doing. He's basically saying, no, these elites and all the rest, they have been running the show for too long. See you, Joe Soap. I speak your language. I have no problem buying the Sun and the News of the World type. And like who does that university professor think he is? Tell him to fuck off type thing. Dude, that's that. You can see it. He's playing all the time to people's prejudices. And by the way, Macron was on the other day. I saw where he's inviting those who want to leave America, the scientists and the researchers and the experts. He said, "We will, look after you," and so on. Jude, I think Europe, Jude, a lot of experts and researchers in American universities now definitely want out.
Oh,
Apparently, yet I'm only going on second on this one. The number of Americans applying for Irish passports now is phenomenal.
yeah, and there was an article in the Irish Times about that, and they were saying that it was very much to the advantage of Irish universities and European universities to avail of this. That there are people who are so frustrated in the States, very talented people who would be, willing to take jobs if they got them in the EU or in Ireland, and I would sort of welcome that. And maybe so we'd see in starker terms where, where's the people who are actually doing worthwhile stuff. and where are the people that are just essentially pretending to do stuff
Yeah,
and be concerned for ordinary people? Let's bring it down, Pat, before we stop now, because we haven't very long left, about 4 minutes. The Eurovision Song Contest is coming up again. I know that's
yeah.
you wait all year for that. And you count the days. I think you told me one time you had a calendar, hadn't you? Where you marked off the day.
I,
Oh, there's six
Jude,
days more to go.
oh Jesus, it's the world's worst show. But no, Jude, I think the reason I mentioned it earlier on was I think 350, I think it was Irish artists, producers, and so on, whatever, entertainers have called on basic call for Israel to be not to be participate. Kevin Backhurst, who's the director general of RTE, has asked for a discussion with the Eurovision people about it. He says now Ireland won't withdraw, so he's asked for what do you call it? I think it's but tokenism, to be honest.
Has
But
he
Jude,
said that
I really have
Ireland
an issue with this.
will withdraw? Has he said that this
No,
has?
Ireland won't withdraw, Jude. Not at all. They'll
He
go.
didn't say
But
that
Jude,
though.
I think Ireland should withdraw. That's the
Yeah.
difference.
But Backhurst didn't say anything about them doing it. He just raised
No,
the question and he has to talk to the EU. What a load of
yeah.
rubbish. They really,
Jude, that's tokenism of the worst kind.
yeah.
Like in other words, and it's like what Ireland and five or four other countries. I see a thing about the Israelis saying they're going to take over all of it. We are deeply, or we are concerned. Jude, what's a concern? Why don't they say we're going to kick out your ambassador and we're going to recognize Palestine as I know ASAP?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought Ireland had already done that. Uh,
No, no, the ambassador left. Wasn't kicked out. She should have been kicked out.
well, and you think that they wouldn't have had the guts to kick her out?
Not at all. No, that might annoy Trump.
Mhm.
Jude, it seems to be, Jude, we have lost all moral compass. What is it, Henry Kissinger? He brought a morality, amorality. He says we don't have morals, we have interests.
Well, that's always to some extent been the case, but I mean, it does seem very blatant in this occasion. Um,
Yeah,
why don't there must be a union of sort of songwriters or singers or whatever that
yeah.
would simply say, no, we're not going to do it and sign,
Jude,
go
wouldn't
to
it be
people and
lovely
sign
if
your name in this.
if the unions and RT told their staff not to man the desks to bring in
Wouldn't that be good?
the
That'd be good.
uh,
And threaten in mid flight even to pull the plug on it. That would be
pull the
dramatic.
plug on it.
That would be a dramatic thing. What about things like soccer and international rugby and so on?
Absolutely, Jude. We say, Jude, there's genocide going on, and we're sitting watching, and we're watching it in real time. We should not be playing football and giving normality to these people. Definitely not.
Yeah, we've only a minute left, Pat. But we this thing I was doing today in the library, what they wound up with was a poem by W.B. Yeats. It's called "The Second Coming." I'm going to read you the last little bit. He says. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Yeah.
I think that's a chilling sort of a. I don't understand
Uh,
all of it, but I get the message just the same.
uh,
Okay, Pat.
uh,
Listen, the
on
sun's
that note,
shining. Go out there, gamble around.
my grass needs cut.
Don't do that. That's leave the insects. Tell Rosie
Uh,
I said you're to leave the insects and leave the
the
grass.
insects.
Okay. Okay, Pat.
Right,
Thanks very
Jude.
much. All the
All
best.
the best. See you.